Leaders, as in when we take your name, whenever is it that you're comfortable, please come on up in the next 10 seconds, okay? Please come on up. Our first leader is Mr. Milind Nanal, the CISO of Škoda Auto, Volkswagen India. Milind sir, what a privilege to have you with us today. Sir, by now you know what's going to happen. One question from our side.
Absolutely. When I came to the stage, I only hear from that speaker. So maybe you need to speak a little louder.
Okay. You need me to speak loudly.
Yeah, so because I'm not able to hear you directly. I mean,
this is the first time, sir. Bachpan se everybody's been telling me I am super loud. So I am happy that finally there is someone who's telling me, Nikita, you're not loud enough. Okay, sir, now you can hear me?
Perfect.
Great. So our question, you know how we do it at 𝐂𝐲𝐻𝐿. We ask you one small innocent question, one-liner answer.
Yeah.
Sir, what would you say is that one risk that we should all take in life, be it personally or professionally, you choose? What is that one risk that everybody should be taking?
One risk that everybody should be taking?
Should be taking, for sure.
Absolutely. I was about to answer
risk.
That. Who answered that?
Arey bhai.
Shadi, absolutely. And that's more practical, right?
That is risk. Oh, this is a risky affair. Great. Fantastic answer. Milind sir, you've got the audience members helping you out, but if you agree, then done. This is your answer.
Absolutely.
Permanenting it. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you to the gentleman who... Sir, my sympathy, sir. Shadi should not be a risk, but okay. Not a problem. Our next leader is Mr. Harshad Mengle from the CISO of Infinity Retail, Tata Company. Harshad sir, what would your answer be? Marriage is taken. Marriage is off the charts now.
No, of course. So, in my opinion, life itself is a risk. It all depends how you're actually mitigating the whole life.
Philosophy, I'm getting teary. Life is a risk. Marriage is a risk. All of you are leading very risky lives. It's okay. You can pause, enjoy, have fun. Done, sir. Harsha sir, answer taken, noted. And of course, the gentleman with the toughest task, the moderator, Mr. Bijendra Mishra, the global CISO of 𝐂𝐲𝐻𝐿 Laboratories. Mishra sir, you've had the maximum amount of time to come up with a brilliant answer. So, marriage, life taken. What would your answer be, sir?
So for me, taking risk itself is a big risk.
Good wordplay. This is going to be a very fun session. So, leaders, stage is all yours. Thank you so much.
So, thank you very much for being here today. My name is Bijendra Mishra, and I'm going to talk with my colleague about third-party vendor risk management. So, as all we know, the threat landscape for cybersecurity professionals and for companies is evolving day by day. Organizations are heavily dependent on third party, and sometimes it shows that we are on high risk. Unfortunately or fortunately, you can say, the substantial business values are being, supported from third-party vendors, stopping us to completely, think about the controls what we have for our third-party partners. So today I have two industry experts here, Mr. Milind and Mr. Harshad, and we are going to hear from them about this very sensitive and business critical topic of third-party vendor risk management. So first I will go to Mr. Milind to get his thoughts on third-party vendor risk management and mitigation. So Mr. Milind, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for getting this physical meet organized. We had been waiting for have this connect. Especially, we lost almost 2.5 years with this COVID situation. So I'm glad and I'm getting this opportunity. So talking about third party, it's something which is not new. And day by day, as the organizations are growing and they increasing their footprint, they are more and more getting dependent on these third parties. So these third parties could be as simple as some short-driven third parties where you do one-time transaction with them. They deliver some goods to you. Then when it gets into another mode of service-driven third party where there could be some service contracts that we are engaged with them. And as you go, it's going to be a performance-driven third party where there could be some level of mutual agreement and some level of strategic initiatives that would engage with them. So these third parties are part and parcel, and anything that we are into business where we are engaged with them, there are associated risks since these third parties are there, which includes, first of all, the information that we give to them. Right from the information, then there could be some, when it comes to legal aspects dealing with these third parties, if there could be some penalized decision in case some goof-up happens and then blame gaming starts. Then there could be some third party being compromised, getting into our reputational loss. So, I mean, I just wanted to name few, but there are so many. And then that's where dealing with the third parties and then handling those risks appropriately is really important and crucial to me. That's what is my opinion.
So thank you, Mr. Milind, for your insights. So already we are mid of the year now, and we have witnessed some of the most, I would say, damaging third-party data breaches. Yeah. And those data breaches, as you said rightly, have further consequences. You may have financial loss, you may have reputational loss. Absolutely. Yeah. So now, considering that risk, I will go to Mr. Harshad to get his inputs. That what do you think about how critical it is to have a vendor risk management program itself? How important is it for any business?
Yeah. So thank you, 𝐂𝐲𝐻 for having me here. It's a wonderful forum, and I think this is my first after COVID. So I'm quite interested and glad to share my views. I think why we are discussing vendor risk management, that might be, one of the important aspect here, because supply chain attack. Today, you look at the supply chain attack, they are on the verge of, they are growing very fast. First is the threat. Second is basically you look at our crown jewels. Now, who has access to these crown jewels? To extend, we are actually extending some of our crown jewels to vendors. That means any breach at vendor is a breach at company. So I think this is equally important for us to look at vendor risk management as one of the most important priority. Now coming back to the question, my views on vendor risk management. I think today we are proactive. We do a lot of risk assessment, vendor risk assessment. Sending checklist, getting response back, and then monitoring those checks and controls. I think we need to go ahead and do something proactive. We need to look at whether we can do AI/ML into vendor risk management, because these checklists we use either Google open source questionnaires or the framework, or we use SIG, one of the questionnaire from SIG, or we use a lot of other methods to ensure that security is compliant by vendor. But still today you will see a lot of VPNs, for example. I'm just taking one example where a lot of VPNs are provided to vendors. How and what we are doing today? Are they, are we ensuring that they have restricted access? See, under the compliance framework, we ensure that they are coming through a proper posture check and all that. But still, in spite of all that, you will see a lot of vendor risk management fails. I think there is definitely a need for us to have some kind of a working group where we can actually set up based on what kind of a outsourcing we are doing based on the business context. We should have a questionnaire which can be, easily treated, because filling those 150 questions, 200, or sometimes even 800, 900 is not easy. And if you look at from a vendor side, because we are into both, we also respond to questions and we also send questionnaires. So it's not so easy. I mean, it's, initially you will feel that, certain questions are easy to respond, but towards the end you will see that, only 60-70% will be compliant. And what is your action? So ideally, there are good frameworks already available. So in my opinion, there should be some working group committee which actually comes together and formulate on what sort of outsourcing we are doing, and for all those outsourcing kind of a model, what should be the ideal questions? And those should be circulated, because if you look at the vendors, they are all same, right? I mean, my company will be having some vendors which other companies will also have. So it will be easy for them, and even the scoring will be easy for us. So I think it's just my thought process, it's basically my thoughts which I think, can be achieved.
Sure, thank you very much. You had given a good insights on that. So, how many of you very often do vendor risk assessment? Can you raise your hand? So, very few. Unfortunately, that's the situation we have, that, vendor risk assessment is not taking, care on priority basis. Normally, if you see standard organizations where you have well-defined policies and procedures, they are doing once a year. Yeah. So when you are doing the vendor risk assessment, few points needs to be considered. The first, when we do assessment, we revisit and rewrite the policies, vendor access policy. And vendor access policy gives us a clarity that what access should be given to the vendor and how often we should review those controls and access. Because what happens normally in IT, if you see that once you give the control and you just forget it, and no one has time to review those access, in a timely manner, and that really opens a big risk window for any breach. So, Mr. Milind, I will come back to you.
Sure.
And get your insights that how often we should revisit and rewrite the vendor risk assessment policy.
Yeah. So first of all, before I start, even the risk assessment, that comes maybe a vendor where the onboarding is already happened. But even before that, even the selection criteria has to be strong. So we should have a right parameters or metrics against which these vendors needs to be chosen very well. We have to look at the interest of both the parties. And as I was saying, I was reading to one of these Gartner's reports, they also talk about categorizing these vendors into a cost-driven approach, performance-driven approach, or what category they fall. Then after even choosing these right vendors, once they are onboarded, then we also need to safeguard the interest of our organization as well as the suppliers, because we call it as third party. And then when it comes to safeguarding the interest, there has to be right clauses in place. So these policies have to be anyways written where all these parameters would be there. The basics that we start is that NDA is there. So if the non-disclosure agreement is there, both parties have signed, and then we think that we are all safe. But that's not the only thing. We need to really revisit what else to be drafted into the policy, right from say, for example, in case of disaster situation, then what our agreement says, there it really talks about how they would react in force majeure situation. So all those have to be explicitly given thought, and because then in real life situation, if these things are not rightly given with that thoughts and written in our policies, that in the contract level these have to be in place, then again, either it gets into a blame game situation, or it gets into not getting right service, and at the end, who's affected? Our second party, who's our customer or suppliers, who are getting affected. So yes, drafting these policies, risk assessment, when and how it has to be done, of course, it's very vague statement if I have to say, because it has to be decided by individual organization depending on what kind of arrangements and what sort of outsourcing that they have. But yes, from the engagement standpoint and the statutory standpoint, these things have to be in place in the contract. That's what my opinion is.
Thank you. So, well said. I mean, I agree with you that all those factors need to be considered when we are revisiting or rewriting vendor risk policy. Yeah. I will come back to Mr. Harshad for his, views on the best practices, what we should follow when we, do a vendor risk assessment. Because if you talk about any framework, whether it's a ISO framework or it's a NIST framework, ICS or any other framework, there is a control which has been very clearly defined that you should follow these practices and perform the vendor risk assessment or third-party risk assessment, whatever you call it. Yeah. So I will get Mr. Harshad's a thought on that.
So I probably will give a pragmatic thoughts here. So we in a best practice we always see we write that right to audit. We should have right to audit vendor. I remember this is nothing to do with my current company. In earlier organizations, I have seen that one of the risk manager, he came to me. He said, "Sir, this organization is in Singapore. So will I get an opportunity to go to Singapore? Because this clause says that I have rights to audit him, and his office is in Singapore." So sometimes it is not pragmatic. So I think we need to be very business aware, or it should be contextualized. So if I am talking about third party, in my opinion, we talk about security by design, privacy by design. Similarly, when you onboard, I think the risk assessment and the security team should be brought in during the inception phase itself. The reason is basically we will know what kind of a data exchange is happening. That's one. Second is whether the organization is up to the mark, what kind of services they are providing. There are very good rating agencies, Bitwise and many other Bitsides, sorry. So there are many other companies which actually give you a rating of vendor. I mean, today you will find these top 500 companies having rated, but what about a small company which is actually doing a software development for us? So I think more from a pragmatic standpoint, I think we need to look at the people there, what kind of a culture they have, what kind of a awareness, security awareness the organization has. And then post that, I think we need to build a strong control mechanism. And this control mechanism should also be educated to vendor, because they are part of, it's basically they are extended arm of our organization. So the way we educate our employees, I think there is a need for us to also consider them as our extended employees. And whatever drives we do today for our employees, we should extend it to the vendor as well. That's my thought. And the more from a checklist again, checklist is, I think it's pretty legacy, I would say. I think there should be a need to have some kind of more AI ML based scoring for every organization, the vendor, and that will actually suffice most of our queries. When it comes to policy, I think every organization nowadays, their policies are cut copy paste, to be very frank. I mean, this is my opinion. To extent we will put some flavor into it based on the business. But when it comes to vendor, I think consolidated, looking at the centralized view, I think is what actually we should focus on. I mean, one vendor is serving similar kind of industry, then we can benchmark that vendor, and then we can carry forward that this is 4 or 5 or 6. Then what kind of awareness or how we can actually strengthen his security, something which everyone should look into, so that these leakages, these data breaches will be stopped.
So thank you very much for this. So one challenge, I mean, when I speak to CISOs and CIOs and business leaders, I mean, they have been facing that how to make balance between your in-house controls and your controls to the vendors, third party. So I mean, they need to have access to your system, whether you have infrastructure or business applications and other environment. Yeah. So how we should make a balance that, see, giving access to the third-party vendor is a business requirement, and we all, are committed to facilitate the, as per the business requirement, any request. So how to make a balance and ensure that the controls are adequate, and I mean, we are not exposing our, landscape to the third party. So, Mr. Milind, maybe you may have some thought on that.
Yeah, so this very right question, and if you see, when it comes to some work to be done from the vendor, so for example, if I have to give, if a person working in your team who's an external partner, so when work is expected to be done, you say, no, you're not partner, you're my extended team, and then that's how they get into this. But when it comes to giving these accesses or discriminating between what is allowed, what is not allowed, there's always a resistance. There's always a thought process that, and then when they have tagged with some external as an agency, it's always a thought that what would happen, whether it's really required, and especially these CISOs are very reluctant. If I'm giving my own thoughts, earlier I was into that mental frame whether it's really required. So, of course, yes, these accesses and all again needs to be given with a very thought process. And I feel the basics what we apply on need to know, need to do basis, or whatever least privilege principles, or some level of controls when we are even giving access to them. For example, segregation of duties, supervision, maker checkers, 3I, 4I principle, or whatever. So all those are which typically which we use in information security as a concept when it comes to the access granting, and then that same applies even for the third parties or the vendors. We have to be very cautious, and of course something is really not required, whatever job he is required to perform. If that's not needed, we can see if that can be restricted. But something where we are expecting them to deliver that particular things, and if we still go into more of a restrictive mode of operating, which at the end affects the overall delivery, then that's not a good way of looking at it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah?
That's where we need to make a balance,
Absolutely.
that business should not suffer, and we should also not get our landscape compromised.
Right.
Yeah?
That's about provisioning the access. Apart from that, again, there has to be adequate monitoring mechanism. And you were saying about the fragmented policy in terms of how do we review in terms of periodic level. There has to be some technology controls even if the manual reviews are getting skipped. For example, if X is not used by X number of days, the ID would be automatically disabled. And there are so many things. I mean, I'm just starting from the basics, quoting one of the, as an example. But we have to also develop this practice and the overall mechanism so as to how we monitor these accesses, and then ensure that it is tagged with the way we are tagged with our exit management process for our own employees, even for the vendors, it has to be in that way. So more system-driven control, more technology-driven control, as I was talking about AI, ML, would really give that balance. But at the end of the day, we need to balance that technology also in such a way that it's not giving a lot of false positives in order to manage that. So it's all a combination of people, process, technology, and the concept that we follow typically in any information security access provisioning needs to be even applied or extended for vendors. That's my view.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm coming back to you, Mr. Harshad. Your thought on that?
So in my opinion, I think policy framework is very much essential. More than that, I think, we today, you look at the vendors, we are also engaging them. They themselves also do, fourth party or subcon. So I think we also need to focus on how this entire contract is basically, handled. So I think it's not just cyber security or security, organizations, but also the legal also need to be, brought in. See, LEA, so certain clauses related to LEA, law enforcement agencies, needs to be there. Where the, what kind of services we are doing, how we are doing it. I think all that actually is basically needs to be, understood in totality before, designing any policy framework. I think most of the, answer is already been given by Milind, but yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So, giving access to third party and not reviewing it regularly is a big mistake most of organizations they do. Yeah. So access is required because it's a business requirement. So no one can stop that. But reviewing those accesses regularly is very important. I have seen in many cases, I can give you one example. One of, vendor was given access to one of the, storage box. Yeah. Because they were supposed to reconfigure that storage. So they were given full access to the storage, they reconfigured, and then they closed that project. And that access was there for 3 years because someone forgot to revoke that access, And sometime when they had some technical challenges with their storage box, and they started to review the controls that who may have done some changes, they found that that vendor still have access to that storage box. So reviewing that control is very important. I mean, regularly we need to review those controls. And risk assessment is equally important. I mean, normally, as I said earlier, that organizations, they do once a year. But you may have multiple challenges from your internal team also when you are doing this risk assessment for vendors. Traditionally, we do assessment through the traditional, way. We have some Excel sheet, some questionnaire. We just ask vendor to, fill those information and share with us, and we take it granted. We don't know. Normally we don't revalidate it. Yeah. Sometimes we ask them to provide some supporting documents, some evidences if they are SOC 2 certified or they have done some VAPT or something like that. But in most of cases, we just refer to that Excel sheet with the questionnaire and all. So we need to have a very holistic approach. We need to ensure that controls are at place, and regular reviewing of those controls are very important. Absolutely. And plus, we can do a regular risk assessment. Once a year is a good practice. Probably, I think we all should agree that once a year we should do that assessment. Again, it depends, that what type of services you are taking from the vendor and what type of control they have to your landscape, your environment. That also depends. So accordingly, you can make your strategy. Yeah. So I think if time permits, we can take 1 or 2 questions. Otherwise, we can conclude this. 1 question? Yeah. So any question?
Either the topic is so interesting that people don't have any questions.
So normally, if you see vendor risk assessment, if you talk 5 years back, it was not in a practice that much. Yeah. But now, even corporates are getting well aware that this is required. This is for the business. It's good to have a regular risk assessment. Yeah. So now this is in practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I can share my experience earlier in BFSI industries. It's just a name change. They used to call us TIPSA, Third-Party Information Security Assessment. Now, maybe right now where I'm working in German companies, they call it as TSAX, Trusted Information Security for Data Exchange. So the name changes. At the end, it's really important.
Yes, question please.
Yeah, actually, I don't have a question. Actually, I just want to add a couple of more points.
Yes, please.
What you discussed, actually, 2 points probably I want to add. One essentially is the purging of data. Absolutely. So that's pretty vital because the one you said that you don't remove the access for some time. So that's one risk. But purging of data actually is a other risk because you're parting away with the data and say a call center.
Absolutely.
So that is very critical. Second actually is, and actually it's more prevalent during the current times, especially after the outbreak of COVID, the BCP aspect. Because how a vendor will deal with the data processing during the BCP time, what sort of controls he will have, assume his employees are working from home, what sort of controls they are having on the data, whether what sort of, in terms of working on data, in terms of sharing of data. So all those things essentially are very vital.
Absolutely.
And these two just I want to add the points to what you are discussing.
Maybe I will just add, I think even when you terminate contracts, okay, what clauses should be there? How you are going to, get your data back.
Actually,
these are all some of the important
points.
points.
That is part of my NDA. So the NDA, the legal documentation should be well defined in terms of litigation, in terms of subcontracting also, because it is vital that some of the regulation don't prescribe for subcontracting, but some of the regulation may not prescribe that, but you can prescribe that as part of your agreement, because you don't have control on the party which is actually not controlled under you. So either tripartite agreement or some sort of thing. All these are the tools to manage the vendor risk management.
Absolutely. Those purging and other things not taken care rightly. You have seen practically those incidences where the data is available on darknet, deep web for people to share.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks for adding those important points. Thank you.
Thank you.